In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. The bad and horrible king had a beautiful girl as a captive. Though her beauty shone like 1,000 moons, the dress she was forced to wear was very unbecoming. She waited day and night, looking out of the dungeon, searching for the knight who would free her. However, every knight was scared away by her dress, which was very ugly. She was crying in hopelessness one day, and the evil king jeered, "See, I told you, no knight would rescue a damsel in distress." We celebrate today the feast of St. Peter and Paul, our patrons. And in the first reading, we heard part of a conversation between Hananiah and Jeremiah in the temple. At first glance, it doesn't appear to be very startling, but it's really part of an argument. It's about the year 597 BC, and the Babylonians have carried off the first captives from Jerusalem and the golden temple vessels. Hananiah, the false prophet, promises that all will be well in a couple of years. The exiles and the vessels will return. But Jeremiah disagrees with him. And our first reading is part of his reply to Hananiah's promise. "I really hope it will be so, but I don't believe it," he says. "And in a couple of years, we're going to see whether you're right or you're wrong." Jeremiah was not afraid to speak the truth. The art of predicting the future, or trying to, has become a bit of a political tool over the past few months. Will the pandemic die out? Will we have a second wave? When will we get back to anything approaching normality? I suppose that we've all been trying to guess when we can safely return to church, when our own exile will end. And we have at the back of our mind the importance of correct predictions for this to be safe. Well, we've been given permission to open the church for worship again from next Sunday. Whether and when this happens is still to be decided. But even if we do open our church, there will still need to be restrictions to ensure safety. Today, exiled from our church, we think about our patron saints, Peter and Paul. And they were very different characters. On the surface, there wasn't very much that was impressive about Paul. He was little. As we know, his name was changed from Saul to Paul after his conversion. And I've never really realised until recently that this might have been a bit of a joke. Paul comes from the Latin name Paulus, which means little. He seems to have been fiery, and there was a lot more to Paul that met the eye. The people he preached to not only became followers of the new way of life, they willingly offered their lives for Jesus Christ too. Peter also changed his name. Peter means rock, Petros. And Peter was probably a big man. The remains uncovered under St. Peter's Basilica in Rome and marked, "Here lies Peter," are those of a large man. Peter, as we know, was a fisherman, and he wasn't, however, always the first to catch on. He made his mistakes. But in the end, he was a rock, strong and steady, and he led the church in Rome. What they have in common was that both of them suffered a martyr's death. They were both also gripped by a new reality. The resurrection of Jesus transformed the way that they viewed the world. They were no longer anchored to their surroundings and their pasts, but they were drawn on by the future. They lived with one foot in the future. The promise of Jesus that the kingdom he had brought in his person, would be the ultimate goal of all his followers. This, for them, changed the meaning of life here on earth. Life was now a preparation for something else, a time of preparation for full entry into the kingdom they were now partially in. Maybe this is why they both had the courage to leave everything behind them, families, friends, homeland, and go into self-imposed exile to spread the word. And their message was clear. They didn't just tell people what they wanted to hear, like Hananiah. They were much more like Jeremiah. They spoke the truth. And this didn't always go down well in a religious world that was very competitive and very touchy. Paul frequently found himself in trouble. He was constantly being beaten up, arrested, and imprisoned, and threatened with death. Peter lived in Rome, where it was illegal to be a Christian. They knew only too well the dangers and the consequences of their new way of life. But having learned from their earlier mistakes, Peter in denying Christ and Paul persecuting the church, they were convinced and determined to live the faith despite unfamiliar surroundings and danger. Celebrating their lives and their ministries today should give us pause for thought. We live in a sort of exile from our church building, which I know many of us are finding very hard. We should draw strength from the lives and witnesses of Peter and Paul, who were so transformed by experiencing the resurrection of their Lord that they left everything to follow him and dedicated their lives to serving him. Perhaps our kind of exile gives us time to reconnect with God in a different way, in different surroundings, and in a world not so very different from the religiously competitive world of Peter and Paul. If we look back, it's easy for us to see why the children of Israel wanted to listen to Hananiah. They wanted to hear that their captivity was going to be over. They wanted to hear that the temple possessions were going to be put back into the temple of God. They wanted to hear that, but it was not the truth. But Jeremiah did tell them the truth. In a world of exile and competing ideologies, it's tempting to take the easy path, and just believe what we want to believe. But as we recall Peter and Paul, we should remember that Jesus calls us to a higher purpose than that. He calls us, whether exiled or in church, to live with one foot in the future and to hold fast to him, whatever life might throw at us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.